the day I brought my son to Disneyland. The guilt of shouting at a 6-year-old lingers longer than any work deadline ever could. For 3 days, Ken had been quieter than usual. His usual morning Disney reports replaced by a cautious silence over his cereal. I knew I had to fix it. After a tense negotiation with my boss and a mountain of paperwork finished at midnight, I finally had the tickets. On Saturday morning, I didn't wake him up with the usual time for school routine. I sat on the edge of his bed, the Mickey Mouse ears hidden behind my back. "Hey buddy, you awake?" I whispered. Ken rubbed his eyes, looking a bit apprehensive. "I'm up, Dad. I'll be quick, I promise." "No rush today," I said, my heart aching a bit at how polite he was being. "Remember how I got loud the other day? About Disneyland?" He looked down at his blanket. "Yeah, because it's not possible as of the moment." He recited my words perfectly. "Well," I said, pulling the ears out and placing them on his head, "I was wrong. My boss said I'm a hard worker and the moment just changed. Pack your bag, Ken. We're leaving in 20 minutes. His eyes went wide, reflecting the morning light. "Wait, for real, not just the park by the mall. The real one, Mickey's house." He didn't even say anything. He just tackled my waist in a hug that nearly knocked me off the bed. The atmosphere at the main gate was electric, filled with the scent of popcorn and the distant sound of a brass band playing Zip-a-Dee-Doo-Dah. Ken was vibrating with pure energy, his hand gripped tightly in mine. Dad, look, the castle is actually huge," he shouted, pointing toward Sleeping Beauty's home. "It's pretty big, isn't it? Which way first, Tomorrowland or Fantasyland?" Ken stopped, looking at the map with the intensity of a general planning a siege. "The babysitter said the teacups make you dizzy, but the Space Mountain is for big kids. Am I a big kid today?" "You're the biggest kid I know," I laughed. "But let's start with the pirates. I heard they have treasure." As we waited in line for the Pirates of the Caribbean, the cool air of the cavern was a relief from the California sun. Ken was leaning against the railing, looking up at me. "Dad." "Yeah, Ken." "Are you gonna get in trouble with your boss for not being at work? I know you have those loud phone calls on Saturdays." I knelt down so we were eye to eye. I told my boss that I had a much more important meeting with a very high-profile client, a pirate in training. Ken giggled, his face finally losing that lingering shadow from our argument earlier in the week. "I'm sorry I pestered you so much. I really wanted to see the magic." "I'm the one who's sorry, buddy. I shouldn't have raised my voice. Work is just work, but this is what matters. Now, do you think you can handle a drop in the dark?" "As long as you hold my hand," he said, puffing out his chest. By 9:00 p.m., Ken was exhausted, sitting on my shoulders as the first sparks of the fireworks show hit the sky. The colors reflected in his eyes, and for a moment the stress of the last 6 years as a single father felt lighter. "This is the best day ever," he murmured, his head resting on top of mine. "Better than the TV version?" I asked. "Way better," he whispered, "because you're here too." I squeezed his legs as we watched the finale, knowing that the weekend of catching up on work would be brutal, but seeing that smile was worth every extra hour in the office. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, cautious silence of earlier that week. It was the peaceful, heavy-lidded exhaustion that only comes after 12 hours of walking, sugar rushes, and pure adrenaline. The car smelled like a mix of spilled popcorn and sunscreen. Ken was buried in the passenger seat under a souvenir hoodie, clutching a plastic sword he'd convinced me was essential gear for a pirate. "Hey, Captain," I said softly, glancing over as I merged onto the freeway. "You still awake over there?" Ken shifted, his head lolling against the headrest. "Yeah, just thinking about the ghosts, the ones in the mirrors." "The haunted mansion, huh? I thought for sure you were going to jump out of your skin when that ghost sat between us in the buggy." Ken let out a sleepy, triumphant giggle. "I wasn't scared, Dad. I saw you flinch, you went whoa, and moved your arm. I was just making sure there was enough room for our hitchhiking friend." I defended myself with a grin. But seriously, was that the highlight? Or was it the big drop on the log flume? Ken sat up a little straighter, his eyes bright even in the dim dashboard light. The drop was cool because of the splash, but I think the best one was the Star Wars one. The one where we had to hide from the big walkers. "Rise of the Resistance," I nodded. "That was intense. You were really good at following the Resistance orders." When the door opened and all those stormtroopers were standing there, "I actually thought we were in trouble," Ken admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I looked at you to see if you were worried, but you were smiling, so I knew it was okay." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "I was smiling because I was watching you. You looked like you were ready to take on the whole First Order yourself." "I would've," he yawned, his energy finally dipping for the night. "I had my sword ready under the seat." We drove in silence for a few miles, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt acting like a lullaby. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." "Even when you're busy with work, can we still talk about the rides? Like tomorrow at breakfast. I want to tell the babysitter that I'm officially a pilot now because of the Millennium Falcon." The guilt I'd been carrying finally dissipated, replaced by a sense of solid, grounded connection. "Tell you what, not only will we talk about it, but we'll print out that photo of us on the log flume. The one where I'm screaming and you're laughing your head off. We'll put it on the fridge so I never forget what's actually important." Ken didn't respond with words this time. He just let out a long, contented sigh, his grip on his plastic sword loosening as he finally drifted off to sleep. As I pulled into our driveway, I looked at the little boy in the seat next to me. The weekend work was still waiting for me on my laptop, and the house was probably a mess, but the moment was finally right. I carried him inside, Mickey ears and all, and tucked him into bed. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I wasn't just managing a household, I was building a childhood. The conversation had been going strong for a good 20 miles, mostly Ken explaining the physics of why a lightsaber could definitely cut through our kitchen table, when the interior of the car suddenly went radio silent. "And then, Dad, if the stormtroopers, they would have to." The sentence just trailed off into the hum of the tires. "They'd have to what, buddy?" I asked, glancing at the rearview mirror. "Negotiate, use a bigger blaster." No response. I looked again. Ken's head was tilted at a precarious 45-degree angle against the window, his mouth slightly open. His essential gear, plastic sword, had slid from his lap and was now wedged between the seat and the door. The fierce resistance pilot had been defeated by a mid-range SUV and a long day of magic. "Copy that, gold leader," I whispered to myself, turning the radio volume down until it was just a faint heartbeat of jazz. Switching to stealth mode. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house was dark and quiet. I turned off the engine, but the silence felt heavy. I sat there for a minute, just looking at him in the mirror. He looked so small under that oversized Mickey hoodie, a far cry from the pestering kid who had been driving me up the wall all week. I hopped out and crept around to the back door, opening it with the precision of a jewel thief. "All right, Ken, time for the final mission," I breathed. As I unbuckled him, he let out a tiny, melodic snore. I scooped him up, tucking his head into the crook of my neck. He was surprisingly heavy for someone who only ate chicken nuggets and churros today. "You're getting too big for this, man," I grunted softly, navigating the narrow hallway of our house. I bumped into the vacuum cleaner, thud, and froze. Ken stirred, his hand reaching up to grip my shirt, but he didn't wake. He just mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like more popcorn and drifted right back out. I made it to his room, kicking a stray Lego out of the way a dangerous feat in the dark, and lowered him onto the sheets. I managed to pry his shoes off without a struggle, but when I tried to take off the Mickey ears, he swiped at the air in his sleep. "Fine," I whispered, pulling the duvet up to his chin. "The ears stay on." I stood in the doorway for a second, my back aching and my brain already mentally calculating the emails I had to answer, but none of it felt like a burden anymore. I leaned over and kissed the top of his head, right between the plush mouse ears. "Good night, pilot. See you at breakfast." I closed the door softly, the click of the latch sounding like a mission accomplished. The house was too quiet. After the hum of the car and the constant chatter of the park, the silence of the hallway felt heavy, almost pressurized. I sat on the sofa, rubbing my face, finally ready to open my laptop and tackle the mountain of work I'd sidelined for the trip. Thump! I froze. It was a dull, heavy sound, like a book falling off a shelf. Thump, thump. It was coming from Ken's room. My heart skipped. Had he fallen out of bed? Was he having a night terror from the excitement? I stood up, my pulse quickening, and crept toward his door. I pushed the door open an inch. The glow of the Mickey Mouse nightlight cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. "Ken," I whispered. No answer. I looked at the bed. There he was, a small, curled-up shape under the duvet, his breathing deep and rhythmic. The Mickey ears were still perched lopsided on his head. He was out cold. I exhaled, feeling foolish, probably just the house settling. I turned to leave, but then I heard it again. Scritch, thud. It wasn't coming from the bed. It was coming from the wardrobe directly across from him. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, vibrating almost imperceptibly. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. A rational voice in my head said raccoon, but my gut knew better. I stepped past the bed, my back now turned to the sleeping figure. My hand trembled as it reached for the wardrobe handle. The air in the room suddenly felt ice cold, smelling faintly of damp earth and old copper. I yanked the door open. My breath hitched, dying in my throat. There, huddled in the corner of the wardrobe amongst the coats and shoes, was a boy. He was deathly pale, his skin looking like wet parchment, and his clothes were tattered versions of the ones we'd bought at the park today. It was Ken. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with genuine bone-deep terror. He reached out a frail, trembling hand, his voice a broken, raspy whisper. "Dad, please, don't let it. It took me at the haunted mansion. It said it wanted a home." My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. My brain scrambled to make sense of the geometry of the room. "But," I stammered, the world tilting on its axis. "Then who?" I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to bolt out the front door and never look back. But I had to. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned my head toward the bed. The figure under the duvet wasn't lying down anymore. It was sitting bolt upright. The Mickey ears were perfectly straight now, framing a face that looked exactly like my son's, yet entirely wrong. The eyes weren't brown. They were two voids of flat, oily black that seemed to absorb the light of the room. The thing on the bed tilted its head, a slow, jerky movement that sounded like dry sticks snapping. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across its face, showing too many teeth. "Why did you have to open it, Dad?" it asked. The voice was Ken's, but it sounded like it was being played through a broken speaker, distorted and hollow. "Luan, we were having such a magical time.